Welcome back to The Making of a Man. If you've been walking with us through this battle plan series, I just want to say I'm glad you're here. These are not surface level conversations. We're getting into the real struggles, the real pressures, and the real calling of what it means to live as a man of God. And if this is your first time listening, I want to welcome you as well. This podcast is about growth. It's about healing. It's about stepping into the man God has called you to be. Not perfectly, but intentionally. In our last episode, we talked about something that every man has to come to terms with at some point. We talked about the enemy inside the marriage, and how the enemy doesn't usually come in through obvious destruction. He comes in through small gaps, small moments of disconnection, small misunderstandings, and unspoken expectations. Conversations that we avoid. And over time, if those things aren't addressed, they don't stay small. They grow. They widen. And before you know it, what used to feel strong starts to feel strained. So if the last episode was about exposing the problem, today is about building the plan. Because here's the reality. Unity in marriage does not maintain itself. It doesn't drift in the right direction. It doesn't just work itself out. Unity has to be built, it has to be restored, and it has to be protected. Scripture is very clear about this. In Ephesians, we're told to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That means unity is not passive, it's intentional. It requires effort, it requires awareness, it requires leadership, and that's what this episode is about. This is not theory. This is not surface level advice. This is a battle plan for how you actively rebuild unity when it's been strained, and how to protect it so it doesn't slowly break down again. Because a man of God doesn't wait for things to fall apart. He steps in early, he takes responsibility, and he protects what God has entrusted to him. But before we get into the practical side of how to do that, we need to define something that sits underneath everything we're going to talk about today. Because if you get this wrong, you can do all the right actions and still miss the heart of it. And that is this. What kind of love are you actually building your marriage on? Let me take a minute and define something that's going to shape everything we're talking about today. Because if you miss this, you'll try to build unity with the wrong kind of love. When most people think about love, they're thinking about something that feels natural, something that flows when things are good. Worldly love says, I love you when I feel connected to you. I love you when you're treating me right. I love you when you meet my expectations. And listen, most of us don't say that out loud, but we live it. Because when things get hard, when there's tension, when there's misunderstanding, when there's hurt, what happens? Love pulls back. It gets quiet. It becomes conditional. But that's not the love Scripture calls us to. The kind of love we're talking about in this episode is agape love. Agape love is not built on emotion. It's built on decision. It says, I choose you even when I'm frustrated with you. I move towards you even when part of me wants to pull away. I forgive you even when it doesn't feel fair yet. Agape love is steady. It's anchored. It doesn't rise and fall with the moment. And here's why this matters in marriage. If your love is based on how you feel, then your unity will always be unstable. Because brothers, feelings change, stress comes, and life happens. But when your love is rooted in a decision, when it's rooted in who God has called you to be, now you're building something that can actually last. Agape love doesn't mean you ignore problems. It doesn't mean you pretend things don't matter. It means you stay engaged, you stay committed, and you keep choosing the relationship even while you're working through the struggle. Agape love is not about pretending things are okay. It's about refusing to walk away when they're not. And if you're honest, this is where the battle is. Because Everything in you at times will want to protect yourself, to pull back, or wait for the other person to go first. But agape love steps in and says, I'm not going to let this drift. I'm going to lead with love because that's who I'm called to be. And when a man lives like that, unity stops being fragile and starts becoming something strong. One of the biggest misconceptions about marriage, and honestly one of the biggest traps the enemy uses, is this idea: if we don't feel close, something must be wrong. That if the connection isn't there emotionally, if things feel off, if there's distance, then something is broken at the core. But that's not the truth. The truth is, unity is not something you feel your way into. It's something you build your way into. Feelings are real, but they're not reliable. They shift, they change, they respond to stress, pressure, misunderstanding, and everything else life throws at us. So if your marriage is built on how you feel in the moment, your unity will always feel unstable. But Scripture gives us a different picture. We're told to make every effort to keep unity. That means unity isn't automatic. It's intentional. It's something you step into, something you choose, something you build. And this is where agape love changes everything. Because agape love doesn't wait for the feelings to show up. It leads. It says, I choose you even when I don't feel connected. I show up even when it's hard. That's a different kind of love, brothers. That's not this emotional love. That's covenant love. That's committed love. That's the kind of love that builds something strong over time. Agape love doesn't wait for feelings. It leads with commitment. Let me make this real for a minute, because this isn't just something I teach. This is something I live out. There have been moments in my marriage where things weren't aligned, where there was tension, miscommunication, or just emotional distance. Not because either of us didn't care, but because life, stress, and past experiences have a way of getting into the space between us. And I remember one particular moment where I felt misunderstood. Part of me wanted to shut down. Part of me wanted to pull back and think, why should I go first if I'm not the only one who contributed to this? And that's the moment right there. That's the crossroads, because that's where conditional love starts negotiating. It says, I'll move when they move. I'll open up when they do. But I felt conviction, that check in my spirit. This isn't about winning. This is about leading. So instead of pulling away, I leaned in. Not perfectly, not with all the right words, but intentionally. I initiated the conversation. I owned the part I could own. I choose to listen instead of defend. And here's the key. Nothing in me felt like doing that at first. That wasn't the emotion I felt in the moment, but that was a decision I made. That was agape love in action. And what happened wasn't instant perfection, but the walls started coming down. The tensions start to ease, and understanding starts to grow. Connection began to rebuild, and that moment reminded me of something I've had to learn over and over again. Unity is rarely restored because both people move at the same time. It's restored because one chooses to lead with the right spirit. Now hear me clearly. This isn't about carrying everything or ignoring real issues. It's about refusing to let pride or hesitation keep something broken longer than it has to be. Because in marriage, especially as a man called to lead, you don't wait for perfect conditions. You step in with the right posture, because agape love doesn't wait, it initiates. And I can tell you from experience, some of the strongest moments of connection in our marriage didn't come from everything going right. They came from choosing to love each other the right way when things weren't. So if unity is built through consistent, intentional choices, then one of the fastest ways it breaks down is through small, unresolved gaps. Not big blow-ups, not major failures, small things left unattended. A comment that didn't sit right, a moment that felt dismissive, a tone that came across wrong. And instead of addressing it, we do what most people do. We stay quiet. We make assumptions. We avoid the conversation. And here's what happens when that becomes the pattern. Silence starts writing a story. You begin to assume intent that may not even have been there. You start replaying moments through the lens of frustration, and what was small begins to grow in your mind, and the longer it sits, the harder your heart gets. Because time doesn't heal unaddressed issues, it hardens them. This is exactly how the enemy works inside a marriage. He doesn't need something big if he can get you to ignore something small. Because every gap you leave unattended becomes the space he can operate in. Scripture gives us a direct instruction for this. Colossians 3:13 says, "Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others." That's not a suggestion. That's a command, a strategy. Because agape love doesn't wait for the perfect moment to forgive. It doesn't say, "I'll deal with this when I feel ready. I'll forgive them when they say it the right way. I'll move on when enough time has passed." Agape love steps in much earlier than that. It forgives before it feels fair. And that's where this becomes real, because everything in you at times will resist that. You'll want to hold on to it just a little bit longer. You'll want to make sure they understand what they've done to hurt you. You'll want to feel justified before you release it. But that's how gaps stay open. Let me be clear, because this matters. Forgiveness does not mean you ignore what happened. It doesn't mean you pretend it didn't affect you. And it doesn't mean you avoid the conversation. Forgiveness means you release the right to hold it over them. It means you deal with it without storing it. Now let's go a level deeper here. Because if we're talking about closing gaps quickly, we have to talk about what happens when we don't. We have to talk about unforgiveness. Because unforgiveness doesn't just sit there quietly. It does something. It builds walls. It creates distance. It changes how you see your spouse, even when they haven't done anything new. What starts as a moment becomes a mindset. You stop giving the benefit of the doubt. You start assuming the worst. You begin responding not to what's happening now, but to what you're still holding on to. And here's the danger. Unforgiveness doesn't just affect the problem. It starts affecting the entire relationship. Because unforgiveness is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It hardens your heart. It blocks connection. And here's the case, brothers, not just with your spouse, but with God. Scripture is very direct about this. We're told to forgive as the Lord forgave us. That's the standard. Jesus goes even further. He ties our willingness to forgive others to our own experience of forgiveness. Not because God is trying to trap you, but because unforgiveness puts your heart out of alignment with Him. You can't receive grace and then refuse to give it. And this isn't just something Scripture tells us. This is something that wise leaders have been warning us about for years. Pastor Craig Groeschel talks about how holding on to forgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. In other words, you think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually damaging your own heart. Pastor Louis Giglio often emphasizes that unforgiveness keeps you tied to the moment you were hurt. You don't move forward. You just stay anchored to what happened. And finally, Pastor Jacoby Martin speaks about how unforgiveness quietly shapes our perspective. It becomes the filter through which we start to see everything, especially our spouse. And in marriage, that's where this becomes dangerous, because now you're not just dealing with one issue, you're building a lens. And over time, that lens turns into distance. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped releasing. This is why agape love forgives quickly. Not because the issue doesn't matter, but because the relationship matters more than holding on to it. If you don't release it, it will reshape how you love. So when Scripture says, bear with each other and forgive one another, it's not just giving you a moral instruction, it's giving you a protection. Because agape love closes the gap quickly, before unforgiveness has time to take root. This is why closing gaps quickly matters. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but intentionally. Sometimes it's as simple as coming back and saying, hey, something fell off earlier. Can we talk about it? Not to attack, not to prove a point, but to keep the space between you clear. Agape love closes gap quickly because it refuses to let the offense take root. Because the longer something sits, the more it shapes how you see each other. And as a man called to lead, you have to recognize that moment early. You have to step in before distance has time to grow. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Because unity isn't just built in the big moments. It's protected in how you handle the small ones. One of the biggest threats to unity, especially after there's been tension or a gap, is defensiveness. That internal posture that immediately starts asking, yeah, but what about what they did? Or why am I the one that has to fix this? And if we're honest, that's where most relationships get stuck. Not because there's no desire to fix it, but because both people are waiting on the other to go first. And what you end up with is a standoff. I'll move when they move. I'll own my part when they own theirs. I'll soften when they soften. But the problem is, unity doesn't get restored in a standoff. It gets restored when someone steps out of it. Scripture cuts right through that mindset. It says, forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. That standard changes everything, because now it's not about what's fair, it's about what reflects Christ. And that's what marriage is a reflection of the relationship between Christ and the church, as we talked about in our last episode. And this is where we have to shift our thinking. Marriage is not 50-50. It's 100-100. Not in the sense that both people are always doing everything perfectly, but in the sense that you both are responsible for bringing your full obedience before God, regardless of what the other person is doing in that moment. That's agape love. Agape love says, I go first. I own my part without demanding yours. Whether it's your wife or you, agape love says, I go first. I own my part without demanding yours. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't wait for fairness. It steps in because it's the right thing before God. Conditional love says, I'll fix this when you fix that. Agape love says, I'll step in because it's right before God. That's a completely different posture. One keeps you stuck. Conditional love keeps you stuck. But agape love has things moving forward. And let's be real. This is where pride gets exposed. Because pride wants to be understood before it understands. Pride wants acknowledgement before it takes responsibility. Pride wants to protect position instead of protecting unity. But a man of God doesn't lead from pride. He leads from humility. He doesn't ask, How little can I own? He asks, where can I take responsibility? Even if it's just 10%. He owns that 10% fully. And what that does is it changes the environment. Sometimes it sounds like, hey, I could have handled that better. Here's where I missed it. That wasn't the right tone. I own that. Simple, clear, no excuses attached. You don't restore unity by winning. You restore it through agape love that chooses humility first. Because when someone steps in with that kind of posture, walls come down faster, defensiveness softens, conversations open up. Not every time instantly, but consistently over time. And here's the truth you have to hold on to as a man leading in a space. You are not responsible for their response, but you are responsible for your obedience. And when you lead that way, you stop feeding the divide and you start rebuilding unity. Once you've started closing gaps and you've taken ownership of your side, the next step is this. You have to intentionally rebuild connection. Because here's what happens in most marriages. When things feel off, people tend to wait. They wait for things to feel normal again. They wait for the tension to fade. They wait for connection to just come back. But connection doesn't come back on its own. It has to be rebuilt on purpose. So instead of waiting for connection, you create it. Scripture says, put on love. That language matters because it means love is not just something you feel. It's something you step into. It's something you choose to put on in how you show up. And in this season, when you're rebuilding connection, agape love looks like this. It's present. It's attentive. It's engaged. Not distracted. Not halfway there. Not just physically in the room, but fully showing up. And this is where it gets simple, but not always easy. Rebuilding connection doesn't require grand gestures. It requires consistent, intentional moments. It looks like taking 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the day and actually checking in. Not surface level, but real conversation. It looks like putting your phone down, turning off that distraction, and being fully present. It looks like asking intentional questions like, where did you feel the most stress today? What's been weighing on you lately? How can I support you better right now? And let me reframe something here, because this is important. This is not about romance first. It's about intentional love and action. Romance can grow from that. Connection can deepen from that. But it starts with showing up consistently in the small moments. Because if you don't rebuild connection intentionally, life will slowly pull you apart unintentionally. Schedules, stress, responsibilities. They don't need your permission to create distance. But unity requires your participation. Agape love doesn't drift. It deliberately draws close. And as a man leading in your marriage, this is where you set the tone. Not by forcing anything, but by consistently creating space for connection. By showing up, by engaging, by making it clear through your actions, this relationship matters. Because connection isn't just something you hope for, it's something you build. Once unity is being rebuilt, once connection is being restored, there's something else you have to understand. You don't just build unity, you have to guard it. Because unity is not just something the enemy tries to break. It's something he tries to slowly erode. That's why in Ephesians 4:3 it says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Keep it. That means protect it. Maintain it. Be intentional about not letting it slip. because guarding unity requires discipline. And this is where agape love takes on another role. It doesn't just build unity, it protects it. Agape love guards your words, your tone, your influences, because if we're not careful, there are subtle things that start working against unity from the inside out. One of them is bitterness. Love protects unity by refusing to entertain bitterness. Not just big resentment, but the small stuff that keeps getting replayed in your head. Because what you rehearse in your head, brothers, you start to reinforce. And if you keep going back to it mentally, it actually never leaves. The second thing are the outside voices. Love protects unity by refusing to let the wrong voices speak into your marriage. Believe me, not everyone who listens to you should influence you, because some people speak from their pain, their experiences, and not from the truth. And if you're not careful, you'll start seeing your spouse through the lens of someone else's brokenness. The third thing is that we need to avoid is rehearsing the offense. Love protects unity by refusing to rehearse the offense, by not constantly revisiting what was said, how it was said, how it felt. Because the more you replay it, the more it defines how you respond moving forward. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like setting guardrails. It means being careful who you vent to. Not isolating, but being wise. It means addressing resentment early, before it has time to take root. And it means protecting time together. Not just fitting your marriage into the leftover space, but prioritizing it. Because if you don't guard your marriage, life will slowly chip away at it. Not all at once, but over time. Again, agape love doesn't just build unity, it stands guard over it. And as a man of God, this is part of your responsibility to be aware, to be intentional, to recognize what's trying to get in, and to shut it down early. Because unity is too valuable to leave unprotected. And what you guard consistently, you give the opportunity to grow. As we bring this together, there's one more piece that has to be clear. Because without this, everything we've talked about becomes unsustainable. True unity in marriage is not just emotional. It's spiritual. It's not just about how you feel towards each other. It's about who you're both anchored to. Scripture says in Ecclesiastes 4:12, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. That's not just poetic language. That's a picture of how marriage is designed to function. Not just you, not just your spouse, but God at the center woven into it. Because the kind of love we've been talking about in this episode, agape love, that doesn't originate from you or me. We don't wake up every day with a full supply of patience, humility, forgiveness, and selflessness ready to go. And if we try to sustain that kind of love in our own strength, we're going to run out. Without God at the center, love slowly becomes conditional. It starts depending on how things are going, how you're being treated, how you feel in the moment. Forgiveness becomes limited. You can only extend it so far, and then you hit a wall. But with God at the center, love becomes enduring. Not because everything is perfect, but because it's rooted in something deeper than emotion. Unity becomes resilient. It doesn't break under pressure as easily because it's being strengthened from the inside out. So what does it actually look like to keep God at the center? It's not complicated, but it does require intention. It looks like praying together, even if it's simple, even if it's short. It looks like inviting God into your conflicts. not just trying to solve them on your own, but stepping back and asking for His perspective. It looks like moments where you pause and say, God, help me love the way you love right now. Because there are going to be moments when your natural response is not patience, it's frustration. It's not grace, it's defensiveness. And in those moments, you need more than willpower. You need connection to the source. You can't live out agape love consistently without staying connected to the source of it. And when God is at the center of your marriage, you're not just trying to hold things together on your own. You're being strengthened, guided, and shaped in the process. Because unity isn't just something you build between the two of you. It's something God builds within you when you stay connected to Him. As we bring this together, I want you to hear this clearly. Scripture calls us to make every effort to keep unity, to forgive as we've been forgiven, and to clothe ourselves in a love that binds everything together. That's not passive language, that's intentional, that's active, that's a calling. Because the kind of unity we're talking about, it doesn't come from emotion. It comes from agape love, a love that chooses, a love that forgives, a love that stays, not because everything is easy, but because you've decided who you're going to be. A man of God doesn't wait for love to feel easy. He leads with it anyway. He forgives quickly. He takes responsibility, and he protects what God has entrusted to him. Not perfectly, but intentionally. So lead with agape love, close the gaps quickly, own your part fully, rebuild connection intentionally, and guard what God is building. Because what you build with God at the center is not easily broken. As you step back into your world this week, your home, your work, your marriage, your friendship, go with this understanding. A man of God is at war. But again, he is never without the commander, never without a calling, and never without the victory Christ has already won. You're not fighting for victory, you are standing from it. So stay alert, stand firm, lead with courage, protect what matters most, and walk not in your own strength, but in the strength that only Jesus provides. Until next time, keep training, keep growing, and keep becoming the man God created you to be. This is our battle plan. This is our calling. This is the making of a man.